Hello everyone, today I'm going to tell you how my cell phone literally saved my life. My son was taking me to the doctor when he said, "Mom's become very forgetful, sometimes she doesn't even recognize me." That was a complete lie. But the doctor seemed to believe him. Luckily, I had learned how to use the recording feature on my phone. I recorded everything. Every lie, every fake symptom, every plan. And thanks to those recordings, I uncovered my son's real plan, to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could steal my house. If you enjoy these real family drama stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now let me tell you how it all began. My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 65 years old, and 3 years ago I lost my husband of 42 years, Robert. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we'd managed to build a comfortable life together. We owned our house outright, had some savings, and a modest investment portfolio that Robert had carefully built over the decades. My only son, David, is 38 years old and married to a woman named Jessica. They've been struggling financially for years. David has never been able to hold down a steady job. He starts with enthusiasm but something always goes wrong. He's been fired from more positions than I can count, usually for conflicts with management or what he calls creative differences. Jessica comes from a family with money, and she's never quite adjusted to their modest lifestyle. She's constantly dropping hints about needing a bigger house, better cars, designer clothes for their 2 children. The pressure she puts on David to provide better is relentless, and I can see how it's wearing him down. Over the past 6 months, they'd started paying me much more attention than usual. David would call every day, sometimes twice. They'd visit at least twice a week, which was a dramatic change from their previous pattern of seeing me maybe once a month. At first, I was thrilled. I thought my son was finally realizing how important family was, especially as I got older. I was touched by their sudden concern for my well-being. "Mom, living alone can't be easy at your age," David would say, looking around our 4-bedroom house with what I thought was genuine concern. "This house is so big for just one person," Jessica would add. "Don't you think a smaller place would be more manageable? You're getting older. And we worry about your safety," David would continue. "What if you fell and couldn't get help?" I appreciated their concern. But I wasn't ready to give up my independence. This house held 42 years of memories with Robert. Every room told a story of our life together: the kitchen where we'd shared countless meals, the living room where we'd watched our son take his first steps, the bedroom where Robert had taken his last breath. But they kept pushing, gently but persistently. "Mom, have you thought about what would happen if you got sick?" Jessica would ask. "We'd want to take care of you, but it would be so much easier if you were living with us. Or at least closer to us," David would add. "Maybe one of those nice senior communities. You'd have people your own age around, activities, medical care if you needed it." I kept declining their suggestions, but I started noticing that their visits had an undertone I hadn't recognized before. They weren't just concerned about my welfare, they were evaluating my house, my possessions, my capabilities. What I didn't realize was that they were building a case against me. Looking back now, I can see how carefully they orchestrated everything. It started with small comments, innocent observations that planted seeds of doubt about my mental acuity. "Mom, you just told me that same story 10 minutes ago," David would say when I'd share an anecdote about Robert or my day. I'd feel confused and embarrassed. Had I really repeated myself? I didn't think so, but maybe I was losing track. "Maggie, are you feeling all right?" Jessica would ask with exaggerated concern. "You seem a little scattered today." They'd ask me questions about current events, then exchange worried looks when my answers weren't immediately forthcoming. They'd test my memory about recent conversations or events, then act concerned when I couldn't recall every detail perfectly. "Mom, do you remember what we talked about last week about the house repairs?" David would ask. "Which repairs?" I'd respond, genuinely confused because we hadn't discussed any repairs. "See? This is what we're worried about," he'd say to Jessica, as if I weren't sitting right there. They started bringing up my age constantly. As if 65 was ancient instead of simply older. "At your age? Mom, it's normal to have some memory issues," David would say with patronizing kindness. "The important thing is to stay safe," Jessica would add. "Maybe we should look into getting you some help around the house." They began questioning my daily routines and capabilities. "Mom, are you remembering to take your medications?" David would ask. Even though I only took a daily vitamin and blood pressure medication that I'd been managing perfectly for years. "Are you eating regular meals?" Jessica would inquire. "Sometimes older people forget to eat properly. How's your sleep? Are you having trouble with that?" David would probe. Every normal aspect of aging, occasionally misplacing my keys, forgetting a neighbor's name, taking a moment to remember where I'd put something, was treated as evidence of cognitive decline. But the most insidious part was how they started undermining my independence in small ways. They'd insist on helping with tasks I could easily manage myself, then act like I couldn't function without their assistance. "Let me carry that for you, Mom. It looks heavy," David would say about a bag of groceries I'd been carrying perfectly fine. "Are you sure you should be driving at night?" Jessica would ask when I mentioned running an errand in the evening. "Maybe one of us should come with you to your doctor's appointments," David would suggest. "Just to make sure you understand everything the doctor says." I started second-guessing myself constantly. Was I really becoming forgetful? Was I losing my independence without realizing it? The doubt they planted grew stronger with each visit. But there was one thing that really bothered me: David's phone calls. I'd noticed that he'd been making a lot of private phone conversations during his visits. He'd step outside or go into another room, speaking in low tones. When I'd ask who he was talking to, he'd give vague answers. "Just work stuff, Mom. Nothing important. Just checking on some things." One afternoon, I heard fragments of a conversation that made my stomach turn. "She's definitely showing signs. Yes, memory issues. It's getting worse. We're really concerned about her safety." He was talking about me like I was already incompetent, but I was sitting in the next room, fully aware and completely myself. That's when I started to get suspicious. And that's when I remembered something my granddaughter Emma had taught me during her last visit. She'd shown me how to use the voice recording app on my phone. "Grandma, this is so cool. You can record anything: lectures, meetings, even conversations. See? Just press this button and it records everything." At the time, I'd thought it was a clever feature but couldn't imagine when I'd use it. Now I could. Last Tuesday, David called with what sounded like genuine concern in his voice. "Mom, I'd like to take you to see a doctor. Just for a general checkup." "David, I just had my annual physical 3 months ago. Dr. Williams said I was in excellent health for my age." "I know, but I think it would be good to get a second opinion. There are specialists who focus specifically on age-related issues." Age-related issues. The phrase made my skin crawl. What kind of age-related issues? Memory, cognitive function, that sort of thing. I found this doctor who specializes in geriatric care. Dr. Richard Steinberg. He's supposed to be excellent. I didn't want to go, but David was insistent. "Mom, please. Do this for me. I'm worried about you, and I'd feel so much better if we could just rule out any problems." The way he said it made me feel guilty for resisting. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe a checkup wouldn't hurt. "All right," I agreed. "But I really don't think it's necessary." "Great. I've already made an appointment for Thursday at 2 p.m. "Already made an appointment? Before even asking me?" That night, I thought about Emma's lesson with the phone recording. Something about this whole situation felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. David's behavior, the sudden urgency about my health, the appointment made without my consent, it all added up to something that made me uneasy. I decided to be prepared. I spent Wednesday evening practicing with the recording app, making sure I understood how to start and stop it, how to save recordings, and how to access them later. Emma had been right, it was remarkably simple once you got the hang of it. Thursday morning, I dressed carefully in a nice blouse and slacks, did my hair, and made sure I looked like the competent, healthy woman I knew myself to be. But most importantly, I opened the recording app on my phone and slipped it into my purse, making sure the microphone wasn't blocked. Whatever was about to happen, I was going to have proof of it. Dr. Steinberg's office was in a medical building I'd never been to before, across town from my usual healthcare providers. The waiting room was sterile and cold, with uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines. David was unusually chatty during the drive, asking me how I was feeling, if I'd slept well, whether I'd remembered to eat breakfast. Each question felt like he was building some kind of record. "Just answer honestly, Mom," he said as we sat waiting. "Don't try to hide anything or pretend you're feeling better than you are." Hide anything? I wasn't hiding anything because there was nothing to hide. When we were called back, Dr. Steinberg greeted us with a practiced smile. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe in his early 50s, with the kind of smooth demeanor that immediately put me on guard. "Mrs. Harrison, please have a seat. David has told me so much about you." David had told him about me? They'd spoken before this appointment? "Now then," Dr. Steinberg continued, "I understand there have been some concerns about your memory and cognitive function." I looked at David sharply. "What concerns? I haven't mentioned any concerns." David jumped in immediately. "Mom, we've talked about this. You've been having some issues lately." "What issues?" "Dr. Steinberg," David said, turning to address the doctor directly, "my mother has become very forgetful over the past few months. She repeats stories, forgets conversations we've had, sometimes she doesn't seem to recognize people she's known for years." I felt my face flush with anger. That's completely untrue. See? David said to the doctor. She doesn't remember, or she's in denial about it. Dr. Steinberg was taking notes. What other symptoms have you observed, David? She's become confused about time and dates. Last week she called me asking why I hadn't shown up for dinner, but we'd never made dinner plans. Another lie. This conversation had never happened. She's also having trouble with basic tasks. I found her staring at the microwave for 10 minutes, unable to remember how to heat up food. That never happened. I protested. Sometimes she doesn't recognize me right away, David continued. She'll look at me like she's trying to place who I am. Dr. Steinberg looked at me sympathetically. Mrs. Harrison? It's very common for people in the early stages of cognitive decline to be unaware of their symptoms, or to deny them when family members point them out. I'm not in cognitive decline, I said firmly. My son is lying. Dr. Steinberg and David exchanged a look. Has she become more agitated or paranoid? Dr. Steinberg asked. Definitely, David replied. She started accusing family members of lying or plotting against her. The irony was staggering. Here he was, literally plotting against me, while using my recognition of that plot as evidence of paranoia. Dr. Steinberg began what he called a cognitive assessment. He asked me to remember 3 words, count backward from 100 by sevens, tell him what year it was and who the president was. I answered every question correctly and quickly. But instead of seeming pleased with my responses, Dr. Steinberg looked concerned. Mrs. Harrison, you've done well on these basic tests, but I have to tell you, many people in the early stages of dementia can still perform simple cognitive tasks. The real indicators are the behavioral changes your son has described. What David described isn't true. I understand this is difficult to accept, Dr. Steinberg said in a patronizing tone. But denial is one of the most common symptoms of early-onset dementia. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This man was taking David's lies as fact and using my protests against those lies as evidence that the lies were true. Doctor, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I would like to know what qualifications you have in diagnosing dementia. Dr. Steinberg looked slightly taken aback. I'm a geriatric specialist. Mrs. Harrison. Are you a neurologist? No. But I work closely with neurologists and psychiatrists who specialize in cognitive disorders. Have you ordered any brain scans, blood tests, or other medical evaluations to rule out other causes of the symptoms my son claims I have? Mrs. Harrison, based on the family history and observed behaviors, I feel confident in my assessment. What assessment? You haven't made an assessment yet. Dr. Steinberg consulted his notes. Based on what David has told me in my brief examination today, I believe you're showing signs of mild cognitive impairment that could progress to dementia. Could progress? Based on what evidence? Mrs. Harrison, I think it would be beneficial for you to have some additional support at home. David, have you considered assisted living options? And there it was. The real purpose of this appointment. Dr. Steinberg, I said, standing up, I'd like to get a second opinion before we discuss any major life changes. Of course, he said smoothly. But I do think it's important not to delay appropriate interventions. What interventions? Well, for starters, it might be wise to have David help you manage your finances and medical decisions. People with cognitive impairment can become vulnerable to scams or poor decision-making. David nodded eagerly. I've been thinking the same thing, Dr. Steinberg. Maybe some kind of power of attorney arrangement? That's exactly what I'd recommend. Just until we can get your mother's condition stabilized. My condition? What condition? I was perfectly fine. But I kept my mouth shut and let them continue talking, because I was recording every word. The drive home was tense. David was practically glowing with satisfaction, while I sat in stunned silence, processing what I'd just witnessed. Mom, I know this is hard to hear, but Dr. Steinberg confirmed what Jessica and I have been worried about. He didn't confirm anything, I said quietly. He took your word for everything without doing any actual medical testing. Mom, denial is part of the disease. He explained that. What disease? He said I could develop dementia. That's not a diagnosis. Look, the important thing now is to make sure you're safe and taken care of. I am safe. I'm taking care of myself just fine. Dr. Steinberg doesn't think so. And honestly, neither do I. When we got to my house, David followed me inside, which was unusual. Normally he'd drop me off and leave. Mom, I think we should call Jessica and discuss what Dr. Steinberg said. I'd rather not. But David was already dialing his phone. Jess? Yeah, we just got back from the doctor. Uh-huh. No, it's like we thought. Yeah, he recommended assisted living and maybe power of attorney. I went into the kitchen and put the kettle on for tea, my mind racing. Something about this whole scenario felt rehearsed, planned. The way Dr. Steinberg had immediately accepted David's claims without question, the way he jumped straight to recommendations about assisted living and legal arrangements, it was too smooth, too coordinated. After David left, I sat down with my phone and played back the recording of the appointment. Hearing it again, I caught details I'd missed in the moment. The way Dr. Steinberg had said, "David has told me so much about you," suggested they'd had extensive conversations before I'd ever set foot in that office. The way David had presented his lies so confidently, and the way Dr. Steinberg had accepted them without asking for any evidence or medical history. This wasn't a medical evaluation. This was a performance. But I needed to be sure. And I needed help. The next morning, I called my real doctor, Dr. Williams, who'd been treating me for over 15 years. "Dr. Williams, I need to ask you something. In your professional opinion, have you seen any signs of cognitive decline in me?" "Margaret, what's brought this on? You just had a complete physical 3 months ago, including cognitive screening. You scored perfectly on all assessments." I explained what had happened with Dr. Steinberg, and Dr. Williams was quiet for a long moment. "Margaret, what you're describing sounds less like a medical evaluation and more like someone building a case for incompetency. I'd like you to come in for a comprehensive cognitive assessment as soon as possible." "Could someone fake symptoms to make it look like I have dementia?" "Absolutely. And unfortunately, elder abuse often involves false claims about mental competency. Can you come in this afternoon?" 2 hours later, I was in Dr. Williams' office undergoing the most thorough mental health evaluation of my life. Cognitive tests, memory assessments, psychological evaluations, even blood work to rule out any medical causes of confusion or memory problems. The results were definitive. I was cognitively intact and showed no signs of dementia, mild cognitive impairment, or any other mental health issues. "Margaret," Dr. Williams said as he reviewed the results, "your cognitive function is actually above average for your age group. Whatever Dr. Steinberg told you was either incompetent or fraudulent. What should I do?" "Document everything. If someone is trying to have you declared incompetent for financial gain, that's elder abuse, and it's a serious crime." That evening, I called my lawyer, Patricia Chen, who had handled Robert's estate. "Patricia, I think my son might be trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so he can take control of my finances." I played her the recording from Dr. Steinberg's office, and I could hear her sharp intake of breath as it played. "Margaret, this is elder abuse, plain and simple. But the good news is that you have everything on tape. We need to move quickly to protect your assets and your legal rights." Over the next week, Patricia and I built an ironclad case. We documented everything: the recording from Dr. Steinberg's office, my legitimate medical records from Dr. Williams, and a timeline of David and Jessica's increasingly suspicious behavior. Patricia also did some digging into Dr. Steinberg's practice. What she found was disturbing. "Margaret, Dr. Steinberg has been involved in 12 similar cases over the past 3 years. Elderly patients brought in by family members, quick diagnoses of cognitive impairment, immediate recommendations for assisted living and power of attorney arrangements. 12 cases? And in 10 of those cases, the family members gained control of significant assets shortly after the diagnosis. So this is a pattern? It's a business model. I think Dr. Steinberg takes payments from family members to provide fraudulent diagnoses that allow them to gain control of their elderly relatives' assets." The pieces were falling into place. David hadn't just found Dr. Steinberg randomly, he'd sought out someone who would give him the diagnosis he wanted, regardless of my actual mental state. But we needed more evidence before confronting David directly. "Patricia, what if we let David think his plan is working? What if I pretend to go along with his suggestions and see how far he'll take this?" "That's risky, Margaret. If he gets you to sign power of attorney documents. But if we can record him admitting to the fraud, we'd have everything we need to not only stop him but to press criminal charges." Patricia thought about it. "It could work. But you'd have to be very careful not to actually sign anything that would give him legal control." That weekend, David called to check on me after the doctor's appointment. "Hi Mom, how are you feeling?" "Confused," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. "I've been thinking about what Dr. Steinberg said." "That's understandable. It's a lot to process." "David, maybe you're right. Maybe I do need help managing things." I could hear the excitement in his voice, though he tried to hide it. "Really? I've been thinking about what the doctor said about power of attorney. Maybe it would be good to have someone I trust handling the complicated stuff." "Mom, that's great. I know this wasn't easy for you to accept. Could you come over this weekend? Maybe bring some paperwork for me to look at." "Absolutely. I'll bring everything Saturday morning." After I hung up, I called Patricia. He's coming Saturday with paperwork. I'll record everything. Perfect. But remember, Margaret, don't sign anything, no matter how much pressure he puts on you. Saturday morning, David arrived with a briefcase full of documents and Jessica in tow. I had my phone recording in my pocket. Mom, I'm so proud of you for being proactive about this, David said as he spread papers across my kitchen table. I looked at the documents. Power of attorney forms, financial management agreements, even preliminary paperwork for what looked like the sale of my house. David, this is a lot to take in. Walk me through what each of these papers does. Well, this first one gives me legal authority to make financial decisions on your behalf. Pay bills, manage investments, that sort of thing. All financial decisions? It's easier that way, Mom. Less confusing for you. Jessica chimed in. It's really for your own protection, Maggie. This way you don't have to worry about complicated financial stuff. And this one? I pointed to another document. That's a healthcare power of attorney. So I can make medical decisions if you're not able to. What kind of medical decisions? Well, like if you need to be moved to a care facility, or if you need medication adjustments, that sort of thing. And this? I held up what was clearly a real estate listing agreement. David looked slightly uncomfortable. That's just preparatory. In case we decide that selling the house is the best option. Selling my house? Mom, Dr. Steinberg said that maintaining a large house could become overwhelming for someone with your condition. And the money from the sale could pay for really nice assisted living. What assisted living? Jessica pulled out a brochure. We looked at this place. Sunset Manor. It's beautiful, and they specialize in memory care. Memory care. For the dementia I didn't have. How much does Sunset Manor cost? I asked. It's expensive, David admitted. About $8,000 a month. But that's why selling the house makes sense. I did quick math in my head. My house was worth about $400,000. At $8,000 a month, that money would last roughly 4 years. What would happen to me after that? David, what happens when the money from the house runs out? Oh, we'd figure something out. Maybe you could move in with us. But I'd already seen the paperwork. The power of attorney was comprehensive and irrevocable. Once I signed it, David would have complete control over my finances. And I'd have no legal recourse if he decided to spend my money on something other than my care. This is a lot to think about, I said. Mom, I really think we should get this settled today, David said. His tone becoming more urgent. Dr. Steinberg said that with your condition, it's important to get these protections in place before things get worse. What if I want to wait and think about it? The problem is, waiting could be risky, Jessica said. What if your condition deteriorates and you lose the ability to make these decisions at all? They were trying to create a sense of urgency. To pressure me into signing before I could think clearly or get advice from someone else. But what if I get a second opinion first? I asked. David's face darkened. Mom, Dr. Steinberg is a specialist. I don't think shopping around for different opinions is going to help. But what if another doctor disagrees with his assessment? They won't, David said with surprising certainty. The symptoms are pretty clear. What symptoms? And that's when David made his biggest mistake. He started listing off all the symptoms he'd reported to Dr. Steinberg, speaking as if they were established facts rather than lies he'd made up. Your memory problems, the confusion about time and dates, the trouble with basic tasks, the paranoid accusations. David, I said quietly, none of those things have ever happened. Mom, this is exactly what Dr. Steinberg warned us about. You don't remember because that's part of the disease. What if I told you I have proof that I don't have any cognitive problems? David looked confused. What kind of proof? What if I told you that I went to another doctor, a real specialist, and he found absolutely nothing wrong with my cognitive function? Jessica and David exchanged glances. Mom, you didn't tell us you saw another doctor, Jessica said. Dr. Williams referred me to a neurologist. I had a complete cognitive evaluation, including brain scans and neurological testing. This was a slight exaggeration, I hadn't had brain scans, but I wanted to see their reaction. David's face had gone pale. What did they find? They found that I'm completely cognitively intact. No signs of dementia, no memory problems, no cognitive decline whatsoever. That's impossible, David stammered. Is it? Or is it possible that Dr. Steinberg's diagnosis was wrong? Jessica was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Maybe we should postpone this discussion until we can talk to Dr. Steinberg about the conflicting opinions. Or maybe, I said, pulling out my phone, we should listen to what Dr. Steinberg actually said during our appointment. I started playing the recording. David and Jessica's voices filled the kitchen, along with Dr. Steinberg's responses. As they listened to themselves plotting my financial exploitation, their faces went through a range of emotions: confusion, recognition, fear, and finally, panic. "You recorded us?" David asked weakly. "I recorded a medical appointment that I had every right to record. What I discovered was that it wasn't really a medical appointment at all. It was a fraud." The silence in my kitchen was deafening. David and Jessica sat frozen, staring at my phone as if it were a bomb that had just exploded. "Mom," David finally said, his voice shaking, "I can explain." "Please do." We were desperate. The house, the kids' school expenses, Jessica's medical bills from her surgery last year. We're drowning in debt. "So you decided to steal my house?" "Not steal." Jessica protested. "We were going to take care of you. Sunset Manor is a really nice place. At $8,000 a month for a condition I don't have." David put his head in his hands. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. Dr. Steinberg said it would just be a formality, that we could set up the legal arrangements and then manage your care properly." "You paid Dr. Steinberg, didn't you?" David nodded miserably. $5,000. For the consultation and the documentation. "Where did you get $5,000? David looked at Jessica, who was now crying. "We took a cash advance on your credit card," Jessica whispered. I felt like I'd been slapped. "You stole money from my credit card to pay a doctor to lie about my mental health so you could steal my house?" "We were going to pay it back." David protested. "With what money?" "The money you'd get from selling my house after having me committed to a memory care facility." Neither of them answered. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. "It wasn't really a plan," David said. "It just evolved. We were talking to some friends about elder care options, and someone mentioned that sometimes families need to make difficult decisions for their parents' safety." "Whose idea was Dr. Steinberg?" Jessica looked guilty. "My cousin went through something similar with her mother-in-law. She recommended him." "Your cousin used Dr. Steinberg to have her mother-in-law declared incompetent?" "It worked out well for everyone," Jessica said defensively. "Her mother-in-law is much happier in assisted living, and the family doesn't have to worry about her making poor financial decisions." I stared at her in disbelief. "You realize what you're describing is elder abuse, right? It's a crime." "We weren't trying to hurt you," David said. "We love you. We just wanted to make sure you were taken care of." "By lying about my mental health, stealing my money, and putting me in an institution?" "It's not an institution. Sunset Manor is very nice. Have you been there? Have you toured it?" They looked at each other uncomfortably. "We looked at their website," Jessica said. "Their website? You were planning to commit me to a facility you've never even visited, based on a fake medical diagnosis, using money stolen from my own credit card." The full scope of their betrayal was staggering. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a desperate mistake. This was a calculated, long-term plan to systematically strip away my independence, my assets, and my freedom. "What happens next?" David asked quietly. "What happens next is that you leave my house and don't come back unless I invite you." "Mom, what happens next is that I'm filing a police report about the credit card fraud and the conspiracy to commit elder abuse." "You're going to have us arrested?" Jessica gasped. "You committed crimes. Multiple crimes. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" David started crying then, not the quiet tears of remorse but the desperate sobs of someone watching their world collapse. "I never meant for it to go this far," he wailed. We needed help, and it seemed like maybe you had more than you needed, and I thought if you could just have me declared crazy, you could take everything I've worked for my entire life." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, David? Explain to me how this was anything other than a plan to steal from your own mother." He couldn't answer because there was no answer. What they'd done was exactly what it appeared to be, a calculated effort to exploit my trust and their relationship with me to gain control of my assets. I stood up and walked to the front door, opening it wide. "I want you both to leave. Now. Mom, please, leave." They gathered up their briefcase full of fraudulent paperwork and slunk out of my house like the criminals they were. After they left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the table where they'd spread out the documents that would have signed away my freedom. My phone was still recording, capturing the sound of my own breathing and the tick of the kitchen clock. Finally, I stopped the recording and called Patricia. "It's done," I told her. "I have everything on tape." The next morning, Patricia and I went to the police station. Detective Maria Rodriguez listened to our recordings with an expression of growing disgust. "Mrs. Harrison, what your son and daughter-in-law did constitutes several serious crimes: elder abuse, fraud, credit card theft, and conspiracy. Dr. Steinberg's involvement makes this even more serious." What happens now? We'll open an investigation. With the recordings you've provided, we have solid evidence of criminal intent and action. I expect we'll be making arrests within the week. She was right. David and Jessica were arrested 3 days later. Dr. Steinberg was arrested the same day, along with 2 other medical professionals who'd been part of his scheme. The investigation revealed that Dr. Steinberg's practice was essentially a front for elder abuse. He'd been taking payments from family members to provide false diagnoses of cognitive impairment, allowing them to gain control of their elderly relatives' assets. In some cases, the elderly people were then placed in substandard care facilities while their money was stolen. David and Jessica eventually pleaded guilty to avoid trial. David received 18 months in prison and 3 years of probation. Jessica received 1 year in prison and 2 years of probation. They were also ordered to pay full restitution for the money they'd stolen from my credit card, plus damages. Dr. Steinberg received 5 years in federal prison and lost his medical license permanently. But the legal consequences were only part of the story. The hardest part of this entire ordeal wasn't the betrayal itself, it was explaining to my grandchildren why their parents were going to prison. Emma and Jake, ages 12 and 10, didn't understand why Grandma had gotten Mommy and Daddy in trouble. Jessica's parents, who took custody of the children during their prison sentences, were understandably angry with me for pursuing criminal charges. "They're your family," Jessica's mother said when I called to ask about seeing the children. "Families should handle these things privately." "They committed crimes against me," I replied. "This wasn't a family dispute, it was elder abuse. You could have just said no to their suggestions. You didn't have to destroy their lives." It was clear that Jessica's family didn't understand the seriousness of what had happened. To them, this was a case of a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion, not a calculated criminal conspiracy. I was eventually allowed supervised visits with Emma and Jake, but the relationship was strained. The children had been told a sanitized version of events, that Mommy and Daddy had made mistakes with money and had to go away for a while to learn how to be better. During one visit, Emma asked me directly, "Grandma, why did you call the police on Mom and Dad?" I sat down beside her on the couch, choosing my words carefully. "Sweetheart, sometimes people we love make choices that hurt us. Your parents tried to take away my house and my money by telling lies about me being sick. But you're not sick." "No, I'm not. But they told a doctor I was sick in my brain, and they were going to use that lie to take everything away from me." "Why would they do that?" "Because they needed money and they thought this was an easy way to get it. But taking things that don't belong to you is stealing, even if you're family." Jake, who had been listening quietly, asked, "Are you mad at them forever?" "I'm hurt and disappointed. But I hope that while they're away, they'll learn why what they did was wrong and decide to be better people." "Will you forgive them?" "Maybe someday. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending that bad things didn't happen. It means choosing not to let anger control your life." The visits remained difficult. Jessica's parents made it clear that they blamed me for their daughter's imprisonment and the disruption to their grandchildren's lives. Eventually, I decided to step back and give the children space to heal without the constant reminder of their family's legal troubles. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I knew that my presence was causing more pain than comfort. In the months following the trial, I had to rebuild not just my sense of security, but my entire understanding of family relationships. For 65 years, I believed that family was the most important thing in life, that blood was thicker than water, that love would always triumph over greed. David and Jessica's betrayal shattered those beliefs. But it also taught me some valuable lessons about boundaries, self-protection, and the difference between love and exploitation. I changed all my passwords, closed the credit card account David had accessed, and put additional security measures on all my financial accounts. I updated my will to reflect my new understanding of my family situation, leaving my house and savings to charities that help elderly victims of abuse. I also became involved with an organization called Elder Shield, which educates older adults about financial exploitation and provides support for victims of elder abuse. My story became part of their training materials, helping other people recognize the warning signs I'd missed. Speaking to groups of older adults about my experience was both healing and empowering. I discovered that my situation wasn't unique. Thousands of elderly people every year are victimized by family members who see them as sources of money rather than human beings deserving of respect and autonomy. The hardest part, I would tell these groups, isn't the financial loss. It's the realization that people you trusted completely were willing to destroy your life for money. But I also shared the lesson that had saved me: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. Don't let anyone convince you that your concerns are symptoms of mental decline. And remember, you have rights, regardless of your age. The recording feature on my phone had literally saved my life. Without that evidence, David and Jessica's plan might have succeeded. I might have ended up in Sunset Manor, my assets gone, my independence stripped away, all based on lies about my mental capacity. Technology, which many people my age fear or avoid, had become my greatest ally. During the investigation, police uncovered the full scope of Dr. Steinberg's operation. It was far more extensive than anyone had initially realized. Detective Rodriguez called me 6 months after the arrests to update me on what they'd discovered. "Mrs. Harrison, we've identified at least 37 cases over the past 5 years where Dr. Steinberg provided fraudulent diagnoses to facilitate elder abuse." 37? And those are just the ones we can prove. We think there may be more. The scheme worked like this: family members who wanted access to an elderly relative's assets would contact Dr. Steinberg's office. For a fee ranging from $3,000 to $10,000, depending on the complexity of the case, Dr. Steinberg would provide a diagnosis of cognitive impairment or dementia, along with documentation supporting the need for the family to take over financial and medical decision-making. Many of the victims never realized what had happened to them. They were told by their families that they were sick and needed care, and they trusted their loved ones enough to go along with the arrangements. Some were given unnecessary medications to make them more compliant. Others were placed in care facilities while their assets were liquidated. The cruelest part, Detective Rodriguez told me, is that some of these people actually started to believe they were losing their minds. When everyone around you insists you're confused and can't trust your own perceptions, you start to doubt yourself. This was exactly what had started happening to me before I discovered the truth. David and Jessica's constant suggestions that I was forgetful or confused had begun to erode my confidence in my own mental faculties. The investigation led to the closure of 2 assisted living facilities that had been taking kickbacks from Dr. Steinberg's network, and to the arrest of several care facility administrators who had been housing victims while their families stole their money. Some of the victims were rescued and reunited with honest family members or friends. Others, tragically, had lost everything and had to rely on state assistance for their care. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, but what struck me most was how easily it had operated. Elder abuse is often invisible because victims are isolated, ashamed, or genuinely confused about what's happening to them. Family members are trusted implicitly, and medical professionals are rarely questioned when they provide diagnoses. If I hadn't learned to use my phone's recording feature, if I hadn't had the presence of mind to document what was happening, I would have become just another statistic in Dr. Steinberg's files. 18 months after David's arrest, I received a letter from him. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it, unsure if I was ready to hear from him. The handwriting was his, but smaller and more careful than I remembered. "Dear Mom, I know I have no right to write to you, and I'll understand if you throw this letter away without reading it. But I needed to try to explain what happened, not to make excuses, but to help you understand how I became someone capable of such betrayal. Prison has given me a lot of time to think about what I did to you. I've been going to counseling here, trying to understand how I convinced myself that stealing from you was somehow justified. The truth is, I stopped seeing you as a person with your own needs and rights. You became, in my mind, a resource to be managed rather than a mother to be respected. I told myself that you had more than you needed, that you'd be happier in a care facility, that we could manage your money better than you could. But really, I was just greedy and entitled. I thought that because you were my mother, I deserved access to everything you'd worked for. I thought your love for me meant you owed me financial support, even if I had to steal it. The worst part is that I dragged Jessica into it. She was reluctant at first, but I convinced her that this was our only option, that you wouldn't miss what we took, that it was practically ours anyway since I'd inherit it eventually. I realize now how twisted that thinking was. Your money was never mine. Your house was never mine. Your life was never mine to control. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to apologize. But I want you to know that I understand now what I took from you wasn't just money, it was your trust, your sense of security, your belief in your own family. I hope you're living well. I hope you found peace and happiness without the people who hurt you so badly. And I hope that maybe, someday, I can become someone who would make you proud again. With love and deep regret, David. I read the letter several times, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd become so adept at recognizing. But this felt different. Not because he was asking for anything, he wasn't, but because he seemed to finally understand the magnitude of what he'd done. I didn't write back immediately. I needed time to process my feelings and decide how, or if, I wanted to respond. One of the most surprising outcomes of my ordeal was the new relationships I formed with other survivors of elder abuse. Through ElderShield, I met dozens of people who'd experienced similar betrayals by family members, caregivers, or financial professionals. There was Margaret, whose grandson had forged her signature on loan documents and defaulted, leaving her responsible for $80,000 in debt. There was Frank, whose daughter had moved in to take care of him and systematically sold his possessions while telling neighbors he was becoming senile. There was Rosa, whose son-in-law had convinced her to sign over power of attorney and then emptied her bank accounts before disappearing. Each story was heartbreaking, but what struck me was the resilience of these survivors. They'd all found ways to rebuild their lives and reclaim their independence, often with limited resources and damaged family relationships. The hardest part, Margaret told me during one of our coffee meetings, isn't losing the money. It's losing the ability to trust. But we can't let them take that from us too, Frank added. If we stop trusting everyone, we stop living. We formed an informal support group, meeting monthly to share experiences and advice. We called ourselves the Phoenix Circle, because we'd all risen from the ashes of betrayal to build new lives. Through the Phoenix Circle, I learned that my story wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was part of a larger epidemic. The National Council on Aging estimates that elder financial abuse costs victims billions of dollars every year, and that's just the cases that are reported. Many victims never come forward because they're ashamed, confused, or afraid of getting family members in trouble. Our group started visiting senior centers and community groups to share our stories and teach other older adults how to protect themselves. We developed a presentation called Trust But Verify that covered the warning signs of financial exploitation and practical steps for safeguarding assets and legal rights. The presentation always included my key message: your age doesn't make you vulnerable. Your trust does. Stay connected, stay informed, and never let anyone convince you that protecting yourself is selfish or paranoid. David was released from prison after serving 15 months of his 18-month sentence. I knew the date because his probation officer called to inform me, as is standard procedure in cases involving family members. Mrs. Harrison, I want you to know that Mr. Harrison has been released and is living in a halfway house in the next county. Part of his probation conditions include no contact with you unless you specifically consent to it. I understand. He's required to attend counseling and perform community service. He's also prohibited from working in any capacity that involves handling other people's finances. A week after his release, I received another letter. Dear Mom, I know I'm not supposed to contact you, but my counselor said it would be okay to write one letter asking if you'd be willing to meet with me. Not to reconcile or to ask for forgiveness, but so I can apologize in person for what I did to you. I understand if you don't want to see me. I understand if you never want to see me again. But if you're willing, I'd like the chance to tell you face to face how sorry I am and how much I regret the choices I made. If you're not ready or if you never want to hear from me again, I'll respect that completely. You don't owe me anything, including this conversation. David, I thought about the letter for 2 weeks before responding. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to continue living my life without the complication of trying to repair a relationship with someone who'd betrayed me so thoroughly. But another part of me was curious. Was David genuinely remorseful, or was this another manipulation? Had prison and counseling actually changed him, or was he simply trying a different approach to get back into my life? Finally, I called his probation officer. I'm willing to meet with David, but only in a supervised setting with you present. That can be arranged. I should warn you, though, you're under no obligation to have any relationship with him going forward. This meeting is entirely for your benefit, not his. I understand. I just want to hear what he has to say. We met in a conference room at the probation office on a gray Tuesday afternoon. David looked older than his 39 years, thinner and more subdued than I remembered. He wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans, and he kept his hands folded in his lap throughout our conversation. Thank you for agreeing to see me, he said when I sat down across from him. I nodded but didn't respond. I want to start by saying that I don't expect anything from this meeting. I'm not asking for forgiveness or for a relationship or for anything else. I just wanted the chance to apologize properly. He paused, collecting his thoughts. What I did to you was inexcusable. I tried to steal your independence, your security, and your dignity. I used your love for me as a weapon against you. I violated every principle you taught me about honesty, respect, and family. His voice was steady, but I could see tears in his eyes. I've spent the last year and a half trying to understand how I became someone capable of doing what I did. And what I've learned is that I stopped seeing you as a person. You became, in my mind, an obstacle to what I wanted rather than a human being deserving of respect. Why? I asked. It was the first word I'd spoken since sitting down. Because it was easier than admitting I'd failed. Easier than accepting responsibility for my own financial problems. Easier than telling Jessica we couldn't afford the lifestyle she wanted. So you decided to steal from me. I told myself it wasn't stealing because I'd inherit it eventually anyway. I told myself you'd be happier in a care facility. I told myself a lot of lies because the truth, that I was willing to destroy my mother's life for money, was too ugly to face. We sat in silence for a moment. "Do you understand what you took from me?" I asked. "Your money, your house?" "No. You took my ability to trust. You took my sense of safety in my own family. You took my belief that love was unconditional." David's composure cracked, and he began crying openly. "I know. And I can't give any of that back. I can't undo what I did or make you feel safe again. All I can do is promise that I'll never hurt you again and spend the rest of my life trying to become someone who would make you proud. How do I know this isn't just another manipulation?" "You don't. And you shouldn't trust me. I lost the right to your trust when I chose to betray it." His honesty was surprising. Most apologies come with requests for immediate forgiveness, but David seemed to understand that forgiveness wasn't something he could ask for or expect. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing. I wanted to apologize sincerely and to tell you that you were right to turn me in. You were right to protect yourself. You were right to choose your own safety over my freedom. Do you think we'll ever have a relationship again?" David was quiet for a long time. "I hope so," he said finally. "But only if and when you decide you want that. And only if I can prove over time that I've genuinely changed." "How would you prove that?" "I don't know. Maybe by living honestly, by taking responsibility for my own life, by never asking you for anything again. By respecting whatever boundaries you need to feel safe." After the meeting, I felt emotionally drained but also oddly relieved. This David, honest about his failures, accepting responsibility for his actions, asking for nothing, was someone I could potentially learn to trust again, though it would take years to rebuild even a basic relationship. As I write this, 5 years have passed since that day in Dr. Steinberg's office when I first pressed record on my phone. I'm now 70 years old, and my life looks very different than it did when this story began. I still live in my house, though I've made some modifications for aging in place. I have excellent relationships with my neighbors, regular contact with my Phoenix Circle friends, and a busy schedule of volunteer activities with Elder Shield. David and I have rebuilt a cautious but genuine relationship. He served his full sentence and probation period without incident, found steady work as a maintenance supervisor at a local school district, and has been paying me back slowly and consistently for what he stole. More importantly, he's never asked me for anything, not money, not assistance, not even emotional support when he was going through his divorce from Jessica. Jessica and I have no relationship, which is fine with both of us. She moved across the country after their divorce and rarely allows the children to visit their father, let alone their grandmother. I see Emma and Jake twice a year when they visit David. They're teenagers now, Emma is 17 and Jake is 15, and while our relationship is cordial, it's not close. Too much damage was done during their formative years for us to have the kind of grandparent-grandchild bond one once hoped for. But I've made peace with that loss. Part of protecting yourself sometimes means accepting that some relationships can't be fully repaired. The most important lesson I've learned is that family isn't defined by blood or obligation, it's defined by respect, honesty, and genuine care for each other's well-being. The people who matter most in my life now are the ones who see me as a complete person deserving of autonomy and dignity. Dr. Steinberg was released from federal prison last year and now works as a night security guard in another state. His medical license was permanently revoked, and he's barred from working in any healthcare capacity. Several of his victims successfully sued him and recovered portions of their stolen assets. The 2 assisted living facilities involved in the scheme were shut down and their operators prosecuted. Some of the elderly victims were able to return to independent living, others required legitimate care and were placed in reputable facilities. My phone, the device that saved my life, sits on my kitchen table as I write this. I've upgraded to a newer model since then, but I still think of technology as my ally rather than my enemy. I've learned to use video calling to stay connected with friends, online banking to monitor my accounts, and yes, recording apps to document any situation that makes me uncomfortable. Age doesn't make us vulnerable to abuse, isolation, and misplaced trust do. Stay connected, stay informed, stay suspicious of anyone who tries to convince you that you're not capable of managing your own life. And remember, you're never too old to learn something new, to stand up for yourself, or to start over. If you're facing a situation like mine, please know that you have options. You have rights. You have value that goes far beyond your financial assets. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply press record. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you or if you think it might help someone else, please share it. And remember, trust your instincts, document everything, and never let anyone convince you that protecting yourself is selfish. Take care of yourselves out there, and never stop fighting for your independence.